Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Madara found Deku first. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had gone silent. It was a strange, suffocating silence that pressed in on Izuku Midoriya, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the city around him. Cars blared their horns, pedestrians chattered on their phones, and the distant wail of a hero's siren cut through the humid afternoon air. But Izuku heard none of it. All he could hear was the echo of 7 words, looping endlessly in the hollow space where his dreams used to be. It's not bad to dream, kid, but you need to be realistic. The words of his idol. The words of the #1 hero, All Might. The man who had just, with a sympathetic but firm finality, taken 15 years of hope and crushed it into dust. His feet moved on autopilot, one scuffed red sneaker in front of the other, carrying him away from the rooftop that had become a gallows for his soul. Each step was leaden, a monumental effort. His school bag, usually a source of comfort with its hero analysis notebooks, felt like a block of concrete strapped to his back. Inside, Notebook 13 lay charred and ruined from Bakugo's earlier assault, a perfect metaphor for his current state. Soaked, burned, and useless, he clutched the strap of his bag, his knuckles white. The city blurred into a meaningless smear of color and light. Neon signs advertising hero merchandise, billboards with smiling, caped figures. They were all salt in a wound so deep he wasn't sure he could ever recover. He'd spent his life looking up at those images with reverence, with a desperate, burning aspiration. Now, he looked at them and felt nothing but a cold, aching void. All Might had been kind, in his way. He'd even saved him from the sludge villain. But kindness was a poor substitute for validation. Izuku hadn't needed a gentle letdown. He had needed a sliver of hope, a single crack of light in the overwhelming darkness of his quirkless reality. Instead, All Might had sealed the tomb completely. A pro-hero's job is a dangerous one. I can't simply say, you can become a hero even without a power. He squeezed his eyes shut, the memory of All Might's skeletal, steam-wreathed form flashing behind his eyelids. The truth of the symbol of peace was a secret he now shared, a burden he hadn't asked for. It was a cruel irony. The one person he'd admired more than anyone in the world had revealed his own profound weakness just moments after confirming Izuku's. His path took him past an underpass, the same one where the sludge villain had attacked. He could see the yellow police tape, the lingering crowds of curious onlookers. He flinched, turning away sharply. He couldn't face it. He couldn't face the place where his inadequacy had nearly gotten him killed, only for his foolishness to nearly get Bakugo killed later. He had been so pathetic. Rushing in with no plan, no power, just a desperate instinct. The heroes had called him reckless. Bakugo had screamed at him, and All Might. All Might had praised his spirit, but it was the praise one gives a brave but foolish dog. My body moved on its own. He had tried to explain. But what good was a heroic spirit trapped in a useless body? He needed to get home. He needed to crawl into his bed and pull the covers over his head and maybe, if he was lucky, not wake up for a week. But the thought of his mother's face, of her worried eyes and the inevitable, tearful apology, "I'm sorry, Izuku," was too much to bear. He couldn't face her pity. Not now, so he turned, ducking into an alley he never used before. It was a shortcut, a labyrinth of narrow passages that snaked through the forgotten underbelly of the city, connecting the bustling commercial district to the quieter residential areas. It was a place where the sun rarely touched, where the air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and overflowing dumpsters. This felt right. This desolate, decaying place matched the landscape of his heart. The alleyways twisted and turned. The sounds of the main street faded, replaced by the drip of water from a rusty pipe and the distant hum of industrial machinery. He walked past graffiti-scarred walls and windows covered in grime. Here, there were no heroes on billboards. There were no smiling symbols of hope. There was only decay. He stopped, leaning his forehead against the cool, rough brick of a warehouse wall. He finally let out the breath he'd been holding since the rooftop, a ragged, shuddering gasp that was half sob. Tears welled, hot and stinging, but he refused to let them fall. He'd cried enough for one lifetime. Crying wouldn't give him a quirk. Crying wouldn't make him a hero. His hand went into his bag and pulled out the ruined notebook. He stared at the charred cover, the waterlogged pages. So many hours, so many years of careful observation, of meticulous analysis, all poured into these pages. It was all he had. It was his desperate attempt to bridge the gap between his quirkless body and his hero-filled dreams. His fingers tightened, ready to hurl it into a nearby dumpster, to throw away the last physical remnant of his fantasy. But he couldn't. Even now, even with All Might's words carving canyons into his heart, some small, stubborn part of him refused to let go. It was a stupid, irrational flicker of defiance in the face of absolute reality. It was the ember that refused to be extinguished by the flood. Well, look what we've got here. The voice was like gravel grinding against stone. It sliced through Izuku's bleak introspection, making him jump. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. 3 men had emerged from the shadows of an intersecting alley. They were gaunt and ragged, their clothes stained and their eyes holding a predatory gleam. The leader, a tall man with a thin, cruel smile and a minor mutation quirk that gave his fingers an extra, twitching joint, took a step forward. "Lost, little man?" he sneered. "Or just looking for a quiet place to cry?" His 2 companions chuckled, a low, menacing sound that echoed off the brick walls. One was short and squat, with skin like cracked pavement. The other was lanky, constantly scratching at his arm where small, metallic quills seemed to grow from his pores. They were textbook low-level thugs, the kind of opportunistic predators who thrived in the city's forgotten corners. Izuku's blood ran cold. His mind, the one thing he'd always been able to rely on, went completely blank. Every hero tactic, every analytical note he'd ever made, vanished in a wave of pure, paralyzing fear. This wasn't a training exercise. There were no rules. "I am just passing through," he stammered, taking a step back. His back hit the solid brick wall. "Trapped. Passing through with that fancy-looking school bag," the leader said, his eyes fixated on it. "Probably got a phone in there. Some cash. Hand it over, and we'll let you go home to your mommy." This was it. The exact kind of situation a hero was meant to handle. But he wasn't a hero. He was quirkless. He was prey. All Might's words came back to him, no longer an echo but a screaming, mocking truth. Without a power, he had nothing. No strength, no speed, no defense. His body trembled, a pathetic, helpless reaction he couldn't control. I don't have any money," he whispered, a lie so feeble it was pathetic. The leader's smile widened, devoid of any warmth. "Don't lie to me, kid." He cracked his multi-jointed knuckles. "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the fun way. For us, at least." The lanky one scraped his quills against the wall, producing a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "He looks like he's gonna piss himself," he snickered. Desperation clawed at Izuku's throat. He scanned the alley. No exits. No one was coming. No hero would patrol these forgotten industrial veins. He was utterly, completely alone. His hand, still clutching the notebook, tightened. It was the only thing he could even think to use as a shield. Pathetic. The leader lunged. Izuku flinched, throwing his arms up to cover his face, bracing for the impact, for the pain, for the final, crushing humiliation of the worst day of his life. But it never came. Instead, a sudden, oppressive silence fell over the alley. It was heavier than before, a palpable weight that seemed to suck the very air from his lungs. The temperature dropped by 10 degrees, a chilling cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Izuku hesitantly lowered his arms. The 3 thugs were frozen in place. The leader was mid-lunge, his cruel smile locked on his face, but his eyes were wide, distant, and filled with a terror Izuku couldn't comprehend. The other 2 were similarly statuesque, their mocking laughter dead on their lips. They were like mannequins in a shop window. And then Izuku saw him. He hadn't been there a second ago. Izuku would have sworn on his life. One moment, there was nothing but a darkened alcove between 2 derelict buildings. The next, a figure stood there, emerging from the shadows as if he were woven from them. The man was wrong. Everything about him felt ancient, and out of place in the modern world. He was impossibly old, his body hunched and frail, leaning heavily on a gnarled wooden staff. He wore simple, dark robes that were tattered and worn, belonging to an era long since past. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his skin like dried parchment stretched thin over a skull. His long, white hair fell in matted strands around his shoulders. He looked like a corpse that had forgotten to lie down. He appeared to be on the verge of collapsing, a dying man taking his last breath. But then Izuku saw his eyes. They were a searing, terrifying red. And within those crimson irises spun a single, black, kama-like tomo, a pattern that seemed to pulse with a malevolent, otherworldly light. Those eyes were not weak. They were not dying. They were burning with a power that felt older than the city itself, a power that vibrated in the very air. The old man took a slow, shuffling step forward. The leader of the thugs, still frozen, let out a choked, gurgling sound. His eyes darted around frantically, seeing horrors only he could perceive. He began to scream, a raw, animalistic shriek of pure agony, clawing at his own face as if trying to rip something out of his mind. Pathetic, the old man rasped. His voice was a dry, crackling whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It held an impossibly deep resonance, a bass rumble of authority that belied his withered frame. He raised a trembling hand, not at the screaming leader, but at the squat thug. He made a small, intricate gesture with his fingers, a sign Izuku had never seen before. A flicker of movement, and suddenly, the old man was gone from his spot. In his place was a splintered, rotten log. Before Izuku could even process the switch, the old man was behind the squat thug. He moved with a speed that was utterly incongruous with his decrepit body. It wasn't the explosive burst of a speed quirk. It was a silent, fluid, unnatural grace. A single, precise strike with the edge of his hand connected with the back of the thug's neck. There was a dull crack, and the man crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he even knew what had happened. One left. The lanky one with the quills. He finally broke from his stupor, his mind snapping back to reality, as his companion fell. His eyes, wide with panic, darted between his screaming leader, his unconscious friend, and the terrifying old man. "A monster!" he shrieked, and in a panic, he activated his quirk. Dozens of sharp, metallic quills shot from his arms, a silver spray of deadly projectiles. Izuku cried out, a reflexive warning, but the old man didn't even seem to notice. He didn't dodge. He didn't flinch. He simply stood there as the quills flew at him. They should have riddled his frail body, turning him into a pincushion. But they didn't. They passed right through him. For a split second, the man's form flickered, becoming translucent, like a ghostly afterimage. The quills impacted the brick wall behind him with a series of sharp pings. The thug stared, his jaw slack with disbelief. "What? What kind of quirk is that?" he stammered, the old man's crimson eye fixed on him. "Quirk?" The word was spoken with a mix of curiosity and utter contempt. "A vulgar term for a borrowed gift. I wield no such crutch." He raised his staff, and the air around it seemed to shimmer with heat. With a grunt of effort, he exhaled a small, controlled plume of fire. It wasn't a hero's flamboyant blast. It was a concentrated jet of orange flame that shot across the alley and struck the ground at the thug's feet, kicking up a shower of sparks and superheated concrete. The thug yelped, scrambling backward and falling over his own feet. The fight was gone from him, replaced by primal terror. He crab-walked away, whimpering, before finally getting to his feet and sprinting down the alley, disappearing into the labyrinth of shadows. The screaming leader finally collapsed, his mind shattered by whatever horrors he had witnessed, frothing at the mouth and twitching on the grimy pavement. Silence descended once more, broken only by the old man's ragged, wheezing breaths. The entire encounter had lasted less than 20 seconds. Izuku was frozen, his back pressed so hard against the wall he felt the texture of every single brick. His mind, his analytical, pattern-seeking mind, was racing, trying to categorize what he had just seen. Teleportation? No, he'd left a log behind. That was a substitution. Phasing? Maybe, but it looked different, more ethereal. Fire breathing? Yes, but it felt elemental. Not like Endeavor's hell flame, but something more fundamental. And the first ability, the one that had paralyzed the thugs and broken their minds with a single look. What was that? A mental-type quirk? But the eyes, those eyes were the source. The old man slowly turned, his ancient, crimson gaze landing on Izuku. The pressure in the air intensified 100-fold. It was like standing at the bottom of the ocean. Izuku felt small, insignificant, an ant under the scrutiny of a god. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs were locked in place. The man took another shuffling step closer, his staff tapping against the ground. He stopped a few feet away, his head tilted as he studied Izuku. His gaze was unerringly perceptive, as if he could see right through Izuku's skin, past his bones, and into the very core of his being. He saw the fear, the despair, the shattered dreams, and something else, something deeper. "You do not fear me as they did," the old man rasped, his voice a low growl. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Izuku's throat was dry. He was terrified, yes, more terrified than he had ever been in his life. But underneath the terror was a spark of something else. Fascination. He had just witnessed a display of power completely outside the known spectrum of quirks. It was controlled, precise, and utterly overwhelming. "Why you?" Izuku finally managed to force a word out. "You're not a pro-hero." A dry, humorless chuckle escaped the man's lips, a sound like grinding stones. "Hero? A title for flamboyant children and charismatic fools who uphold a system built on sand. They are performers, placating the masses with hollow victories while the true rot of this world festers in the shadows. I am no hero." He took another step, his red eyes boring into Izuku's. "I sensed it from the street. A great despair. A soul on the precipice. And yet," his gaze sharpened, "beneath the despair, there is an ember, a will that refuses to be extinguished. I saw it in your eyes when you faced them. You were afraid, but you did not break. Tell me, boy, what is the source of this fire?" Izuku didn't know how to answer. He thought of his mother, of his notebooks, of the countless videos of All Might he'd watched. He thought of his one, all-consuming dream. I want to be a hero," he confessed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I want to save people, and they told you that you could not," the old man stated, his voice flat. "They looked at your vessel and found it wanting. The symbol of peace himself clipped your wings, did he not?" Izuku flinched as if struck. How could he know? How could this stranger know the exact nature of the wound that was still bleeding in his chest? "This world is obsessed with innate gifts," the man continued, his voice laced with a deep, ancient disdain. "These quirks, they are accidents of birth, doling out power without regard for merit or strength of will. They create an imbalance. The gifted grow arrogant, the ungifted grow desperate. It is a flawed system, destined for collapse. The peace they champion is an illusion, a fragile veneer over a chasm of chaos." Every word resonated with the fresh cynicism blooming in Izuku's heart. He had just lived the truth of those words. He had been dismissed because of an accident of his birth. "You believe power must be given," the old man said, tapping his staff on the ground for emphasis. "A gift from genetics, or a torch passed from one gilded symbol to another. You are wrong. True power is not given. It is not inherited. It is forged. It is seized from the universe through discipline, through pain, and through an unbreakable will. It is drawn from within." He raised his wrinkled hand, and a faint, pale blue aura flickered around it, visible even in the dim light of the alley. It was soft, yet it pulsed with an energy that made the hairs on Izuku's arms stand up. "This is chakra," the old man explained. "The life energy that flows through every living thing. It is the fusion of spiritual and physical energy. It is the foundation of all my techniques. It is a power that resides within you, boy. Dormant. Untapped. A wellspring of potential that these quirk-obsessed fools have forgotten how to access." Izuku stared at the blue aura, his mind reeling. Chakra. Life energy. It sounded like something out of pre-quirk comic books or ancient mythology. But he had seen the proof. The substitution, the impossible speed, the fire, the phasing, it all came from this. "You possess the single most important ingredient," the old man continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The one thing that cannot be taught. The will of fire, a determination so strong it strains against the confines of your own body. In my time, such a will was the prerequisite for greatness. Here, it is seen as a flaw. He leaned closer, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku's. The single tomo in each eye seemed to spin, drawing Izuku in, captivating him. The heroes of this world offer you platitudes and pity. They tell you to accept your limits. They tell you to be realistic. He sneered, unknowingly quoting All Might's exact words. I offer you something else. I offer you power. The power to shatter your limits. The power to forge your own destiny. I will teach you how to unlock the chakra within you. I will teach you the techniques of my clan. I will give you the strength to force this broken world to acknowledge you. I will make you stronger than any hero. The offer hung in the air, heavy and seductive. It was everything he had ever wanted, presented to him in a dark, twisted package. This wasn't the bright, smiling path of All Might. This was a path through the shadows, guided by a man who was more phantom than human. It felt dangerous. It felt wrong. But what other path did he have? A desk job as a police officer? A lifetime of looking up at the heroes in the sky, forever grounded? A future of mediocrity and regret? He looked down at his own trembling hands. He remembered his powerlessness against the sludge villain. His helplessness against the thugs. The cold finality in All Might's voice. The world had told him, in no uncertain terms, that he was not enough. And here was someone, a terrifying, ancient, and undeniably powerful being, telling him that he was. That the one thing he had in abundance, his will, was the only thing that truly mattered. This wasn't just an offer of power. It was an offer of validation. Izuku's mind was a battlefield. One side held the gleaming image of All Might, the symbol of everything he had once believed in, selfless sacrifice, smiling heroism, a light that never wavered. The other side was this shadowy figure, offering a ruthless, pragmatic strength, a philosophy born of a darker, harder world. But All Might's light had failed to reach him. It had cast him into shadow. And it was in this shadow that he now stood. He looked up, meeting the old man's intense gaze. His fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but the ember of his will, which had been flickering and dying all day, was now being fanned by this man's words. It began to glow, to burn hotter. A choice. A real choice. To accept reality as defined by others, or to forge a new one. Why? Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper, but clear in the silent alley. Why me? The old man's lips twisted into what might have been a smile, though it looked more like a grimace of ancient satisfaction. Because a world that discards a will such as yours is a world that deserves to be remade. You are a tool, boy. A perfectly flawed, wonderfully desperate vessel. I will sharpen you into a blade that can carve a new era of order out of this chaos. He saw Izuku as a tool. The honesty was both chilling and, strangely, reassuring. There were no false promises of glory, no talk of fame. Only purpose. What? What do I have to do? Izuku asked, the words feeling momentous on his tongue. You will cast aside everything you think you know about power, the old man commanded. You will dedicate your body, your mind, and your soul to my teachings. You will endure pain you cannot yet imagine. You will become my student, my successor. You will obey me in all things, and in return I will give you the world. He extended a gnarled, trembling hand. It was an invitation. A pact. Izuku looked from the offered hand to the unconscious thugs on the ground. He looked at his own charred notebook, still clutched in his fist. He saw the path ahead splintering into two. One led to a quiet life of forgotten dreams. The other led into this darkness, a terrifying unknown, but an unknown that held the promise of strength. He wanted to save people. That was the core of it all. All Might had said he couldn't. This man was saying he could, but his way. Perhaps to truly save people, you needed a power that heroes, with their rules and restrictions, were afraid to wield. With a deep, shuddering breath that felt like the last breath of his old life, Izuku Midoriya reached out and took the old man's hand. The skin was cold and dry, like ancient paper. The grip, however, was like iron. I accept. Izuku said, his voice firm, resolute. The tears he had been holding back all day finally fell, but they were not tears of sadness or despair. They were tears of catharsis, of a terrible and exhilarating beginning. The old man's crimson eyes glowed with triumph. The single tomo in each eye spun, and for a fleeting moment, Izuku could have sworn he saw them multiply. Good! The man rasped, his voice resonating with the weight of ages. My name is Madara. Madara Uchiha. And from this day forward, your life is mine to mold. He released Izuku's hand. The oppressive pressure in the alley lessened, but did not vanish. It had simply changed. It was no longer the aura of a stranger, but the possessive, watchful presence of a master. A ghost that would now be forever bound to him. Madara looked at the charred notebook in Izuku's other hand. Burn it, he commanded. Izuku looked down at the last relic of his childhood dream. He hesitated. That book is a monument to your weakness, Madara said, his voice sharp. It is filled with the analysis of others' power. From now on, you will focus only on your own. The ashes of your dream will be the soil from which true power grows. Izuku stared at the book for a long moment. Then, with a quiet finality, he nodded. He walked over to the spot where Madara's small fire jet had scorched the concrete. A few embers still glowed faintly. He knelt and placed Notebook 13 on top of them. He watched as the faint heat caught the dry, waterlogged edges, and a small, hesitant flame began to lick at the cover, slowly consuming the drawing of All Might. He did not look away until it was all gone, until nothing remained but a pile of gray, weightless ash. When he stood up, his eyes were clear. The boy who had walked into the alley was gone. Madara nodded, a flicker of approval in his ancient eyes. No, he said, the word echoing with the promise of pain and power. Let us begin. The 10 months that followed were not a period of training. They were a systematic deconstruction and rebuilding of Izuku Midoriya, body and soul. The process began less than an hour after he had watched his final hero notebook turn to ash. The world was draped in the deep indigo of pre-dawn when Madara's spectral voice first roused him from a fitful, shallow sleep. Awake, boy! The weak rest. The strong prepare. Izuku's body screamed in protest. Every muscle ached with a profound exhaustion he had never known. The previous day's events, All Might's rejection, the encounter in the alley, the pact with a ghost from another world, felt like a fever dream. But the phantom presence in his room, a chilling certainty that settled in the back of his mind, was undeniably real. Madara was here. He dragged himself out of bed, his limbs feeling like lead weights. He dressed in a simple t-shirt and sweats, the fabric coarse against his skin. There was no All Might poster on his wall anymore. He had taken it down before he'd gone to sleep, the smiling face now a source of a complex, bitter ache. He had folded it carefully and hidden it at the bottom of his closet, a relic of a dead religion. His mother was still asleep. He moved with a practiced silence, leaving a simple note on the kitchen table. Going for a morning run. Love you? It was a lie, but it was a kinder one than the truth. The truth was that he was going to a place of ruin to be reforged by a monster. His destination was the Goba Municipal Beach Park. Once a beautiful coastline, it had become an illegal dumping ground over the years, a mountain range of rusted appliances, broken furniture, and mountains of forgotten trash, all lapped by a polluted sea. It was a scar on the city, a place heroes and police ignored. It was perfect. Madara manifested as Izuku reached the trash-strewn sands, a translucent, shimmering outline against the rising sun. He was no longer the hunched, dying man from the alley. Here, in this private space, he allowed his spectral form a shadow of its former glory. He stood tall, his posture regal, his long hair seeming to flow in a wind only he could feel. He was still an echo, a ghost, but he was an echo of a king. Look at this place. Madara's voice resonated, not through the air, but directly inside Izuku's head. It was an intimate, invasive form of communication. A testament to the decay of your era. They create, they consume, and they discard. They do the same with people. He gestured with a phantom hand towards the mountains of junk. This will be your crucible. Izuku had expected a lecture, perhaps a demonstration of a technique. He did not expect Madara's first command. Move the large refrigerator at the base of that pile. Move it to the top. Izuku stared at the rusted, hulking appliance. It was half buried in sand and other debris. It probably weighed over 300 pounds. But I can't, he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Madara's mental voice was like a whip crack. Can't is the mantra of the weak. It is the excuse of the common man who dies without leaving a mark upon the world. You will not utter that word in my presence again. Your body is a vessel. It is weak because your mind allows it to be. Now move it. And so, the physical hell began. For the first hour, Izuku did nothing but dig. He used his bare hands, clawing at the compacted sand and jagged metal, his fingers quickly becoming raw and bloody. Then he pushed. His legs trembled, his back screamed, and the refrigerator barely budged. He strained until black spots danced in his vision, a raw, animalistic sound tearing from his throat. Madara watched, his expression unreadable, offering no help, no encouragement. He was a silent, judging statue. Izuku collapsed, his lungs burning, his body shaking uncontrollably. I need a break, he gasped. Did the thugs who cornered you offer a break? Madara's voice was cold. Did the villain who attacked you pause for your convenience? The world will not wait for you to catch your breath. Your enemy will not grant you a reprieve. Get up. He forced himself to his feet. He tried again. And again. The sun climbed higher, beating down on his back. Sweat and tears mingled on his face, stinging the cuts on his fingers. He wasn't just moving a refrigerator. He was trying to move a mountain. The task was impossible, designed to break him. And that was the point. After 3 hours of non-stop, agonizing failure, as Izuku lay sobbing in the sand, his body a single, throbbing bruise, Madara finally spoke again. Your body has reached its limit. Good. Now the real training begins. This became the pattern for the first month. Wake before dawn. Suffer at the beach until his body gave out. Shove a quick breakfast down his throat and run to school, his legs shaking with every step. Endure the day in a fog of pain, ignoring Bakugo's sneers and the teacher's pitying looks. After school, it was back to the beach for more punishment until dusk. He'd stumble home, eat, collapse into bed, and repeat. He wasn't just moving trash. Madara had him performing exercises of impossible difficulty. One-handed push-ups on jagged metal. Pull-ups from rusty, unstable pipes. Carrying tires filled with sand across the beach until his shoulders felt like they were being torn from their sockets. It was a relentless assault on his physical limits. Madara was merciless. When Izuku vomited from exhaustion, Madara told him to keep going. When his muscles cramped and seized, Madara told him the pain was a sign of weakness leaving the body. There was no praise, only the cold, quiet expectation of obedience. But alongside the physical torture was another, stranger form of training. Sit, Madara commanded one afternoon, as Izuku was trying to catch his breath. Cross your legs. Close your eyes. We will unlock the wellspring. This was the beginning of his lessons in chakra. Madara's explanation was both elegantly simple and maddeningly abstract. Chakra is life. It is the energy born from the cells of your body, physical energy, and the energy forged through experience and consciousness, spiritual energy. You will learn to draw on both. You will mold them together. To a novice, it feels like reaching for something that isn't there. You must feel the warmth in your stomach. The core of your being. That is the source. Now focus, Izuku tried. He sat for hours amidst the filth of the beach, trying to feel this inner energy. His analytical mind wanted to break it down, to quantify it. He thought about cellular biology, about mitochondria producing ADP. He thought about neurological signals. Stop thinking, you fool! Madara's voice thundered in his skull. This is not an equation to be solved in one of your pathetic notebooks. It is an extension of your own soul. You cannot reason your way to it. You must feel it. Reach for it. Command it. Frustration became his constant companion. He could push his body until it broke, but this internal, esoteric task felt 1,000 times harder. Days turned into weeks. He felt nothing. It was like trying to grip smoke. His body, however, was changing. The baby fat he'd carried his whole life melted away, replaced by lean, dense muscle. His posture straightened. The perpetual slouch of the victim was gone. A new, sharp alertness entered his eyes. He moved with a quiet economy of motion, a stark contrast to his old, clumsy self. At school, people began to notice. The whispers followed him. Bakugo's taunts became laced with a new, confused anger. He couldn't understand the transformation. Izuku was still quirkless, still Deku, but he no longer looked like one. He looked dangerous. One evening, nearly 2 months into his training, a breakthrough occurred. He was meditating, his body aching, his mind numb with fatigue. He had given up on trying to force it. He simply sat, letting Madara's instructions echo in his head. Feel the warmth. Draw it out. And for a split second, he did. It was a faint, gentle flicker deep in his gut, like the pilot light of a furnace. It was so faint he almost missed it. He gasped, his eyes flying open. I felt it. It is a start. Madara's voice was flat, betraying no excitement. You have found a single drop of water in an endless ocean. Do it again. That single drop was all he needed. Now that he knew what to feel for, he could find it again. Slowly, painstakingly, he learned to draw that warmth out, to coax it from his core and guide it through his body. It was an exhausting process. In the beginning, moving a tiny thread of chakra to his fingertip left him as breathless as lifting a car engine. This opened the door to the next stage of his training, the philosophical indoctrination. As Izuku struggled to master his chakra, Madara began his lectures. They were not simple lessons. They were insidious, masterfully crafted narratives designed to warp Izuku's perception of the world. This year's concept of peace is a farce, Madara stated one evening, as they watched the distant city lights flicker to life. It is a fragile truce maintained by celebrity soldiers. They fight symptoms, boy, not the disease. They capture a villain, and 2 more rise to take his place. They smile for the cameras while the foundations of their society crack beneath their feet. It is a child's solution to an adult's problem. He began to tell Izuku stories of his own time. He spoke of the endless wars between clans, of the Uchiha and the Senju, 2 sides of the same powerful coin. He painted a picture of a brutal, honest world, where strength was the only currency that mattered. My friend Hashirama, the man they call the god of Shinobi, he had a dream much like yours. Madara's voice was laced with a complex, ancient sorrow. He dreamed of a world where children would not have to fight on battlefields. He built a village, a system to protect the weak. A noble goal. But his method was flawed. He believed in trust. He believed that by extending a hand in friendship, others would do the same. He was a fool. He twisted the history to fit his narrative. He spoke of the Uchiha being ostracized, of their power being feared. He framed his own actions not as a quest for domination, but as a desperate attempt to bring about a true, lasting peace that the Senju's soft-hearted idealism could never achieve. True peace cannot be built on trust, for trust is always betrayed. Madara lectured, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. It can only be built on control. Absolute control. When one being possesses the power to enforce order, to end all conflict with overwhelming might, only then can humanity be saved from itself. It is not tyranny, boy. It is salvation. Izuku listened, his mind a sponge. He had spent his life idealizing heroes, but now, he was seeing the cracks Madara pointed out. He'd seen news reports of villains escaping, of heroes causing massive property damage, of civilians caught in the crossfire. He saw heroes endorsing products, their faces plastered on everything from energy drinks to children's toys. Were they saviors, or were they a brand? One afternoon, he saw Endeavor on television, effortlessly incinerating a group of low-level villains. The crowd cheered for the number 2 hero. Izuku's old self would have been in awe, but now, all he heard was Madara's cynical commentary. Look at him. He uses a sledgehammer to kill a fly. He burns half a city block to stop a petty theft. Is that strength? Or is it a vulgar display of power for the sake of his own ego? A true warrior ends a conflict with minimal effort, with precision. That man is not a warrior. He is a walking forest fire. Izuku's internal conflict was a quiet, simmering war. His core, the part of him that had rushed headlong to save Bakugo, still screamed that saving people was about offering a hand, about protecting the innocent with a smile. But Madara's logic was a slow-acting poison, seeping into the wounds of his own experience. A helping hand is temporary, Madara scoffed one day, after Izuku voiced this doubt. You pull one man from a river, and the next day he falls in again, or worse, 10 others fall in while you are busy with the one. I will teach you to build a dam. To control the river itself. To prevent anyone from falling in ever again. My way is harder. It is colder, but it is permanent. An iron fist provides forever. The words chilled him, but he couldn't deny their brutal logic. How many times had he seen the same villains captured and recaptured? The system wasn't solving the problem. It was just managing the symptoms, exactly as Madara had said. By the 6th month, his physical and chakra training merged. Madara introduced him to the true foundation of a shinobi, chakra control. Power is meaningless without control, Madara instructed, pointing to a towering, ancient tree at the edge of the beach. You will learn to focus your chakra to your feet and walk up this tree. For weeks, Izuku failed spectacularly. He would run at the tree, channel his chakra, and either blast a hole in the bark with too much power or slide off uselessly with too little. The bark of the old tree became scarred with his failures. His analytical mind finally found purchase here. This was a problem he could solve. He began taking notes again, not on heroes, but on himself. He meticulously documented the feeling of his chakra, the output required, the exact point of balance. Madara, for once, did not reprimand him for this. Your mind for tactics is your sharpest weapon, the ghost admitted. Use it. But do not let it become a cage. Analysis must serve action, not replace it. The day he finally took his first successful step up the trunk, then a second, then a third, until he was standing upside down on a branch high above the ground, was a victory sweeter than any he had ever imagined. From his perch, he could see the whole city spread out before him. For the first time, he felt a sense of power that came not from a borrowed gift, but from his own, hard-won skill. Water walking followed, then the 3 basic academy jutsu that Madara deemed essential, the substitution jutsu, the clone jutsu, and the transformation jutsu. He learned to create ethereal, non-substantial clones for decoys and solid clones that could fight and think alongside him. He mastered the art of swapping his own body with a nearby object in the blink of an eye. He was becoming a phantom, a tactician, a creature of the shadows. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the crybaby. He was Madara's student. In the final month before the UA exam, with his body honed to a razor's edge and his control over his chakra refined, Madara decided it was time. You have built the furnace and gathered the fuel. Madara's voice was solemn, holding a weight Izuku had not heard before. Now you will learn to unleash the flame. You will learn the signature of my clan, Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu. The fire style, Fireball Jutsu. They stood on the beach at midnight, the full moon casting a silver sheen over the mountains of trash. The air was cold, the only sound the gentle lapping of the waves. Madara walked him through the sequence of hand seals, snake, ram, monkey, boar, horse, tiger. Izuku's fingers, now nimble and strong, mimicked them perfectly. Draw a deep breath, Madara instructed. Gather a large amount of chakra in your chest. Convert it to fire. Expel it. Annihilate your target. He indicated a derelict, rusting bus carcass 50 feet away. Izuku took a deep breath, channeled his chakra, and performed the seals. He brought his fingers to his lips and blew. A pathetic puff of hot air emerged, dissipating instantly. He tried again. This time, a tiny, sputtering flame, the size of a candle flicker, died before it reached 2 feet. He tried a dozen more times, his frustration mounting with each failure. He had the chakra. He had the control. Why wasn't it working? You lack conviction. Madara's voice was sharp, cutting. This is not a parlor trick, boy. It is an act of destruction. It is the manifestation of the Uchiha's will. To command the flame, you must feed it. You must give it a piece of your soul. I don't understand. Izuku grunted, his throat raw. Your desire to save people is a passive dream, Madara explained, his spectral form seeming to loom over him. It is a shield. Fire is not a shield. It is a sword. To wield it, you need a more potent fuel. Tell me, boy. What do you hate? Izuku blinked. Hate? Yes. Hate. Anger. The world has wronged you. It has labeled you. It has dismissed you. Use that. The years of being called Deku useless. The sneers. The pity. The explosions of the blonde one who called himself your friend. The hollow words of the symbol of peace as he left you on that rooftop. Do you not feel the rage simmering beneath your skin? That is the fuel, Izuku Midoriya. That is the fire. Madara's words were a key, unlocking a dark room in Izuku's heart he had kept sealed his entire life. He had never allowed himself to hate. He had always made excuses, always turned the other cheek. He had absorbed the pain, the humiliation, and filed it away under motivation. But Madara was right. Beneath it all, there was a core of pure, incandescent rage. Rage at his own helplessness. Rage at a world that had judged him unworthy before he even had a chance to try. He thought of Bakugo, his hand smoking, a cruel smirk on his face. You're worse than these rejects, you quirkless wannabe. He thought of All Might, his skeletal form wreathed in steam. You need to be realistic. The ember of his will, the one Madara had first seen, began to burn with a black fire. The warmth in his stomach was no longer a gentle pilot light. It was a churning inferno. Yes, Madara whispered, sensing the shift. Embrace it. Let it consume you. Let it become your strength. Show me the fire that forges. Izuku's eyes snapped open. They felt hot. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air itself seeming to fuel the furnace in his chest. He performed the hand seals, his movements no longer just a technical exercise, but a ritual. Each sign was a word in a sentence of annihilation. Snake. Ram. Monkey. Boar. Horse. He paused on the final seal. Tiger. He channeled everything into this moment. 10 months of pain. 15 years of humiliation. The rage. The despair. The desperate, burning need to prove them all wrong. He molded it with his chakra, compressing it into a single, volatile point of energy in his lungs. He brought his thumb and index finger to his mouth, forming a small circle, and unleashed it. The world erupted in fire and sound. A colossal sphere of roaring, incandescent flame erupted from his lips. It was not a small puff or a flickering flame, it was a sun. It tore across the sand, superheating the air, turning the ground beneath it to glass. It struck the bus with a deafening boom that echoed across the water. The rusted metal frame was instantly vaporized, the vehicle exploding in a shower of molten shrapnel. The fireball continued, scorching a massive, blackened crater in the trash heap behind it before finally dissipating, leaving behind a glowing, orange inferno. The kickback sent Izuku stumbling backward, his lungs empty, his throat seared. He fell to his knees, panting, staring at the destruction he had wrought. The heat washed over him in waves. The acrid smell of burnt metal and plastic filled the air. It was terrifying. It was absolute. And it was beautiful. He had done that. Quirkless, useless Deku had done that. He slowly raised a trembling hand, looking at his own fingers as if they belonged to someone else. This was power. Real power. Not borrowed. Forged. Good. Madara's voice resonated in his mind. It was the first time in 10 months that the word had held any warmth, a chilling, possessive pride. You are no longer a boy with a foolish dream, you are an Uchiha in all but blood. You are a weapon. And tomorrow, at the UA entrance exam, you will show this world its first glimpse of true power. Izuku looked at the roaring flames that danced where a bus used to be, his reflection flickering in the heat haze. His eyes, wide with a mixture of awe, pride, and a deep, profound fear of what he was becoming, seemed to glow in the firelight. The fire he had created was bright, but the path Madara was leading him down was darker than he could ever imagine. And he was just taking his first steps. The gates of UA High School were less a set of gates and more a triumphal arch, a monument to the golden age of heroes. They soared towards the sky, a symbol of hope and aspiration that drew thousands of the nation's brightest and most powerful youths to its hallowed grounds. To the boy Izuku Midoriya had once been, This place was a holy site, the very apex of his life's ambition. To the boy he was now, it was simply the first battlefield. He walked through the throng of nervous applicants, a calm island in a sea of jittery energy. He could feel their quirks crackling in the air, a chaotic symphony of latent power. Some kids were vibrating with excess speed, others leaked sparks from their fingertips. One girl even had gossamer wings that fluttered with anxiety. They were peacocks, displaying their genetic gifts with a mixture of pride and fear. Look at them! Madara's voice, a dry rasp in the confines of his skull, was filled with contempt. They wear their power like a gaudy cloak, ignorant of the fact that it is the only thing they possess. They have no discipline, no foundation. They are leaves in the wind, and a storm is coming. Izuku's gaze swept over them, his eyes not wide with a fanbus glee, but narrowed with a tactician's assessment. Madara had taught him to see past the flashy displays, to look for the weaknesses. The boy with the engine calves had exposed joints. The girl with exploding hands likely had a limit to her secretions. He was dissecting them, filing away their data, just as he had in his old notebooks. But the purpose was different now. It was not for admiration. It was for combat. His own physical transformation was a stark contrast to their overt power. 10 months of relentless, brutal training had stripped him of all softness. He was lean, corded with the dense muscle of a gymnast, and moved with a silent, predatory grace that was utterly at odds with his plain face and unruly green hair. His school uniform, which once hung loosely on his frame, now fit him like a second skin. But the most significant change was his posture. He stood straight, his shoulders back, his chin level. He took up space in the world, no longer apologizing for his own existence. He reached the registration desk, the line buzzing with nervous chatter. When his turn came, he handed his form to the tired-looking administrator. The woman scanned it, her finger tracing down the line until it stopped. Her eyebrows shot up. Midoriya Izuku, she read, then looked up at him over her glasses. Quirk none. Is this correct? The question was loud enough for those nearby to hear. The chatter quieted. A few heads turned, expressions ranging from pity to outright disbelief. A wave of mockery rippled through the immediate vicinity. Quirkless? Seriously? Someone whispered. What's he even doing here? The old Izuku would have shrunk, his face would have flushed crimson, and he would have stammered an apology. This Izuku simply met the administrator's gaze, his own eyes calm and unblinking. It is correct, he said, his voice even and clear. The woman stared at him for a moment longer, searching his face for any sign of a joke. She found none. There was only a placid, unnerving confidence. Shaking her head slightly, as if dismissing a curiosity, she stamped his form and handed him his exam pass. Auditorium A, good luck. Izuku took the pass and walked away, the whispers and snickers following him like a wake. He felt no shame. He felt nothing but a cold, hard resolve. Let them underestimate me, he thought, the sentiment echoing Madara's own philosophy. Their arrogance will be their undoing. The written exam was, as Madara had predicted, trivial. The questions that stumped his peers were simple exercises in logic and pattern recognition for him. His mind, already naturally analytical, had been sharpened on the whetstone of chakra theory and shinobi tactics. He finished with time to spare, sitting in perfect stillness while others around him chewed on their pens and sweated through their uniforms. After the written portion, they were herded into a vast, darkened auditorium for the practical exam briefing. The stage exploded with light and sound as the voice hero, Present Mike, appeared, his signature blonde hair and leather jacket a stark contrast to the formal setting. "Hello, examinees!" he screamed, his voice amplified to an ear-splitting degree. "Welcome to the live performance! Can I get a hey?" Silence. Izuku sat impassively, his eyes scanning the presentation slides before they even appeared. His focus was absolute. Present Mike launched into a hyper-energetic explanation of the exam. They would be fighting against 3 types of villain bots in a sprawling urban mock-up, each worth a different point value. The goal was to score as many villain points as possible within the time limit. A child's game. Madara scoffed internally. They teach you to fight mindless puppets in a controlled environment. This is how you create performers, not warriors. Observe their construction. The joints are unarmored. The photoreceptors are exposed. Aim for these vulnerabilities. Do not waste energy on their chassis. As President Mike was wrapping up his explanation, a tall, well-built young man with glasses shot to his feet from a few rows ahead, his hand raised ramrod straight. "Excuse me, sir. A question, if I may." All eyes turned to him. He pointed a rigid finger at the exam pamphlet. "On this printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. Not 3. If this is a misprint on official UA documentation, it is a great shame. We are all here today as exemplary students, and we expect the highest standards from Japan's premier hero academy." He then spun around, his sharp eyes landing on Izuku. "And you, with the unruly hair, you have been muttering and analyzing this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave." The accusation was bizarre. Izuku hadn't muttered a single word. He had been perfectly silent, his mind a whirlwind of tactical calculations, but his lips hadn't moved. The boy with glasses had mistaken his intense focus for distraction. The old Izuku would have panicked, waving his hands and apologizing profusely. This Izuku simply met the boy's intense gaze. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He gave a slow, deliberate nod of his head, a gesture that was neither apology nor agreement. It was simply an acknowledgement, cold and dismissive. The boy, clearly expecting a different reaction, was momentarily thrown off balance. Before he could press the issue, President Mike took back the stage. All right, examinee 7111. Thanks for the sharp catch," he shouted. "The 4th villain type is the arena trap. It's worth 0 points. Think of it as a gimmick, an obstacle to be avoided, so I recommend you listeners ignore it." The boy with glasses bowed deeply. "Thank you very much, sir. I apologize for the interruption." He sat down, though he occasionally threw a suspicious glance back at the unnervingly calm green-haired boy. "Rigid," Madara's voice observed. "Bound by rules and decorum. He sees the world as a manual to be followed. He will be the first to break when the manual is set on fire." Izuku filed the assessment away. Engine quirk, based on the protrusions from his calves. Personality, inflexible. A potential threat in a structured environment, a liability in a chaotic one. The examinees were divided and sent to their respective battle centers. Izuku found himself at Battle Center B, standing before a gargantuan set of steel doors. He stretched his limbs, feeling the familiar hum of chakra beginning to pool in his stomach. The other applicants were a mess of nerves. A girl with brown, bobbed hair was taking deep, calming breaths. The boy with glasses from the auditorium was doing lunges. Bakugo was nowhere in sight, likely in a different center. That was for the best. He was a distraction Izuku didn't need right now. And start! President Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The massive doors slid open, revealing a breathtakingly detailed cityscape. For a few seconds, everyone stood frozen, confused by the abrupt beginning. "What's wrong?" President Mick's voice called out again. "That's it. The test has begun. There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run! Run! Run!" That was the only cue Izuku needed. While the others were still processing, he exploded into motion. He wasn't the fastest, not yet, but his movements were efficient, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground as he shot past the stunned crowd and into the artificial city. "Initiative is the key to every battle." Madara's voice was a low hum of approval. "Seize it, and you control the flow of the conflict." Izuku ducked into an alleyway, immediately pressing his back against the wall, his senses on high alert. The sounds of heavy, clanking machinery echoed through the concrete canyons. He closed his eyes for a second, focusing his chakra. "Bunshin no Jutsu," he whispered. With 2 silent puffs of smoke, 2 identical copies of himself appeared at his side. They were not solid, they were illusions, decoys. They nodded to him, their expressions as serious as his own, and then shot off in opposite directions. To anyone watching, it would look like a cloning quirk. But Madara had taught him the subtlety. The clones were for reconnaissance and misdirection. They would draw the robot's attention, allowing him to observe their attack patterns and identify their locations without exposing himself. Less than 30 seconds later, the feedback came. Not through words, but through the simple dissolution of one of the clones as it was smashed by a one-point robot that had rounded a corner. The image relayed to Izuku in that final instant was perfect. The robot's attack trajectory, its speed, the placement of its single, glowing red eye. Izuku moved. He rounded the corner just as the one-pointer was turning away from the dissipating smoke of his clone. The robot was fast, but its movements were mechanical, predictable. Izuku didn't need overwhelming power. He needed precision. He leaped, pushing a small, controlled burst of chakra to the soles of his feet to propel him upwards. He landed silently on the robot's shoulder, a feat of balance that would have been impossible for him 10 months ago. Before the machine could react, he drove his right hand, fingers stiffened into a spear, into the robot's single photoreceptor. He channeled a tiny, sharp pulse of chakra through his fingertips. There was a crackle of static, a shower of sparks, and the robot's red eye went dark. It froze for a moment before its legs gave out, and it crashed to the ground, inert. 1 point. Came the automated announcement from his pass. Izuku landed softly, already scanning for his next target. No wasted energy. No collateral damage. Just a clean, efficient kill. This became his rhythm. He was a ghost in the machine city. He sent clones down main streets to cause chaos, drawing the robots into ambushes. When a group of 3 two-pointers cornered him, he used the Kawarimi no Jutsu, the substitution jutsu, swapping places with a trash can at the last possible second. As the robots blasted the can to pieces, Izuku dropped from a fire escape above them, disabling each one with precise, chakra-enhanced strikes to their unarmored neck joints. The other applicants were using brute force. Explosions rocked the city. Lasers tore through buildings. But Izuku was a surgeon, dismantling the enemy with quiet, terrifying competence. The points on his pass began to climb steadily. 1, 3, 7, 13, 21, 28. In the observation room, a bank of monitors displayed feeds from every corner of the battle centers. A handful of UA's top pro heroes, including Principal Nizu, sat watching the next generation of heroes in action. Ooh, that kid with the explosion quirk in Battle Center A is a real powerhouse, President Mike commented, pointing at a screen showing Bakugo blasting multiple robots at once. He's got a villain's attitude but a hero's power level. He's talented, but he's a blunt instrument. Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa, grunted from his slouched position, his eyes scanning a different set of monitors. Destructive, but inefficient. He's already showing signs of fatigue. His gaze drifted, landing on a feed from Battle Center B. A green-haired applicant was moving through the streets with an eerie calm. Who's that? A proctor keyed in the examinee's number. Midoriya Izuku, sir. His file is interesting. It says his quirk is none. Aizawa sat up straighter, his perpetually tired eyes widening slightly. Quirkless? That can't be right. On the screen, Izuku created 2 clones to draw the fire of a 3-pointer. While the robot was distracted, he sprinted forward, slid underneath its legs, and drove a chakra-powered palm strike into the primary actuator on its hip, crippling it. Is that his quirk? Some kind of cloning? Midnight asked, leaning forward. No, look, Aizawa said, pointing. The clones dissipate after a single hit. They have no substance. They're more like illusions. And his speed, it's enhanced, but not consistently. He uses it in short bursts, and his strikes, he's not just strong, he's targeting specific weaknesses. This isn't the wild flailing of a boy with a new strength quirk. This is tactical. All Might, in his skeletal form, watched from the back of the room, a cup of tea trembling in his hand. He recognized the boy instantly. The earnest, tear-streaked face from the rooftop. But this was not the same child. The desperate hope was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus that chilled him to the bone. Every move was precise, calculated, and utterly without flourish. There was no joy in his actions, no heroic passion. He was just a weapon, executing a mission. A profound sense of unease, thick and sour, settled in All Might's stomach. What did I do? He thought, the question a painful throb in his chest. What have I unleashed? Most interesting, Principal Nizu said, his black eyes gleaming with intelligence, as he watched Izuku swap places with a chunk of concrete to evade an attack. He displays abilities that mimic multiple quirks: cloning, teleportation, minor superhuman strength and speed, yet none of them seem to function like a traditional quirk. It's a paradox, a delightful, fascinating paradox. Back in Battle Center B, Izuku had racked up 45 points. He had found a rhythm, a deadly dance of feints, substitutions, and precise strikes. He felt a detached sense of satisfaction. It was working. Madara's methods, born from a world of war and assassination, were perfectly suited to this environment. Your peers are predictable, Madara noted. They announce their attacks with shouts. They rely on overwhelming power. They have never been taught the value of silence and surprise. Exploit this. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. A low, grinding rumble grew into a deafening roar. From behind a skyscraper, a shadow fell over the entire street. The zero-pointer. It was immense, a true titan of metal and wiring, easily towering over the tallest buildings in the mock city. Its single red eye glowed with menacing intent. It was an obstacle, a force of nature designed to inspire panic. And it worked. The other applicants, who had been fighting with bravado moments before, turned and fled. Screams of, "It's the zero-pointer!" and "Run away!" filled the air. This was the correct tactical decision. The robot was worth no points, and fighting it was suicide. Izuku's first instinct was to do the same. This was in line with Madara's teachings. It is an obstacle for fools. Disengage. Its presence will herd the other prey towards you. He turned, ready to melt back into the alleyways and pick off the fleeing robots that the zero-pointer was scaring up. But then he heard a cry. "Ow! My leg!" He stopped, his head snapping towards the sound. It was the friendly-looking girl with the brown hair from the entrance. She had tripped over some debris while trying to escape and was now lying on the ground, a large piece of concrete pinning her leg. She was directly in the path of the colossal robot's advance. Its massive foot was rising, preparing to take a step that would crush her into paste. No one was helping her. They were all running, their own survival their only concern. Izuku froze. His mind was a warring tempest. "Leave her!" Madara's voice was cold, logical. "She is not your concern. Her weakness is her own failing. Your mission is to pass this test, not to play the part of the foolish martyr." But the image of the girl, her face pale with terror, looking up at the descending metal foot, it struck a chord deep within him, a chord that Madara's 10 months of brutal indoctrination had not been able to sever. It was the same instinct that had sent him rushing towards the sludge villain to save Bakugo. It was the core of his being, the ember that refused to be extinguished. "I want to save people." "This is not saving!" Madara's voice raged in his head. "This is pointless self-sacrifice. You will gain nothing." "I don't care about points," Izuku screamed back in the privacy of his own mind. He looked at the girl, then at the robot. His analytical mind took over, not for points, but for salvation. The robot was too big. Its armor was too thick. A physical strike was useless. He couldn't substitute with something that large. He couldn't disable it with a simple jab. He needed something else. He needed overwhelming power. He needed fire. A grim smile touched Izuku's lips. "So, the martyr plays his part." Madara's voice shifted, a grudging, chilling acceptance in his tone. "Very well. If you must act the fool, then do it with purpose. Do not show them a hero. Show them a god. Show them a power they cannot comprehend. Make them fear you." Izuku's body moved. He didn't run towards the robot. He ran parallel to it, putting himself between it and the trapped girl. He needed a clear line of sight. The other applicants, fleeing in the distance, stopped and turned, their curiosity overcoming their fear as they saw a single figure standing defiant before the mechanical behemoth. He stopped, planting his feet, his body sinking into a low, stable stance. The air around him grew still. The noise of the city faded into a dull roar. There was only him, his target, and the furnace churning in his chest. He brought his hands up, his fingers flying through the sequence of seals. His movements were a blur of perfect, practiced precision. Snake, ram, monkey, boar, horse, tiger, As his fingers formed the final seal, he drew in a massive breath, pulling all the air from his surroundings. He channeled his chakra, not the small, precise burst he had been using, but a huge, surging torrent of it. He mixed it with the rage, the frustration, the memory of every insult, every dismissal. He molded it into a volatile, compressed sphere of pure energy in his lungs. He brought his thumb and forefinger to his lips. Katan, Gokaki no Jutsu! The world turned to fire. A colossal fireball, far larger and more intense than any he had practiced on the beach, erupted from his mouth. It was not a sphere of flame. It was a roaring, miniature sun. It screamed through the air, turning the very atmosphere to plasma. The asphalt beneath it melted and boiled. The other applicants cried out, shielding their eyes from the blinding light. The teachers in the observation room leaned forward as one, their faces illuminated by the glow from the monitor. All Might stood up, his mouth agape. Izuku's aim was perfect. He didn't target the robot's head or its chest, a fool's mistake. He targeted its left leg, specifically the complex, piston-filled ankle joint. The fireball struck with the force of an artillery shell. The sound was a deafening, echoing krakom that shook the very foundations of the battle center. The superheated plasma instantly turned the robot's armored plating molten red, then white. Metal groaned, warped, and then liquefied. The intricate joint system, the pistons and actuators, were flash-melted into a useless slag. The zero-pointer was not destroyed. It was strategically amputated. Its leg gave out. The Titan groaned, a shriek of tortured metal, and began to lean, its immense weight now catastrophically unbalanced. It teetered for a moment, its single red eye flickering as its internal systems failed. Then, it began to topple, falling like a felled skyscraper, away from the girl, just as Izuku had calculated. He hadn't just attacked it, he had controlled its fall. The job wasn't done. While the robot was still falling, while everyone else was still blinded by the afterimage of the fire, Izuku moved. He pushed the last of his immediate chakra reserves to his feet and sprinted. He was a green blur against the backdrop of fire and smoke. He reached the girl, grabbed the chunk of concrete pinning her, and with a final, desperate surge of chakra-enhanced strength, tossed it aside. He scooped her into his arms and leaped backward, clearing the area just as the zero-pointer crashed to the ground with a cataclysmic impact that sent a shockwave of dust and debris washing over the city. Silence. The exam-ending buzzer blared, a pathetic sound in the face of the destruction. The dust began to settle. The applicants who had fled slowly lowered their hands from their faces, their eyes wide with disbelief, staring at the scene. The fallen Titan, its leg a molten ruin, the massive scorch mark that had turned the street to glass. And in the center of it all, standing in the shadow of the defeated behemoth, was the boy. The quirkless boy. Izuku gently set the girl down, his lungs burning, his body screaming from the massive chakra expenditure. He was exhausted, but he was standing. The girl looked up at him, her round eyes filled with a mixture of terror, confusion, and overwhelming awe. Thank you? She stammered. Izuku just nodded, his chest heaving. He had done it. He had saved her. In the observation room, the teachers were speechless. The monitors showed the utter devastation in Battle Center B. President Mixed Jaw was on the floor. Aizawa was leaning so far forward he was nearly out of his chair, a rare, wolfish grin spreading across his face. Illogical. Aizawa breathed, the word filled with a giddy sense of discovery. Completely and utterly illogical. I love it. All Might sank back into his chair, pale and trembling. That fire, that devastating, controlled power. It was not the power of a hero learning the ropes. It was the power of a soldier ending a war. He had looked at this boy and seen no potential. He had told him to give up. And in his place, something terrifying and powerful had taken root. The regret he felt was a physical, crushing weight. Mizu, however, was beaming. He took a long, slow sip of his tea, his eyes twinkling with manic delight. Well now, the principal chirped. That was quite the paradox. His villain points are exemplary, more than enough to pass. He looked at the screen showing Izuku, standing tall amidst the ruin, and for the selfless rescue and the complete neutralization of a threat that no other applicant would even dare to face. I believe maximum rescue points are in order. He set his teacup down with a soft click. Admit him, Niza declared, his smile widening. Put him in Aizawa's class. I want to study this one personally. As the gates of Battle Center be opened, Izuku walked out, ignoring the awestruck, fearful stares of the other applicants. He was drained, his chakra coils scraped raw, but he was victorious. He had passed. He had saved someone. He had shown them all. But as he walked towards the exit, Madara's voice whispered its final, chilling verdict in his mind. You indulged your foolish heroic impulse. You saved the girl, yes. A trivial matter. But in doing so, you achieved something far more valuable. Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with his exhaustion. Look at their faces, boy. The ones you will call your peers. They do not see you as a savior. They do not see you as a friend. They see power that they cannot comprehend, and it terrifies them. Awe is fleeting. Respect can be lost. But terror is a far more reliable tool for control. Today, you did not become a hero. You became a king on the battlefield. A very good first step. The letter from Yue had arrived without fanfare. There was no tearful hologram from All Might, no grand proclamation of heroism. It was a simple, formal acceptance, its crisp paper detailing his exemplary scores on both the written and practical exams. His mother had wept with a joy so profound it was almost painful to watch. She saw it as the miraculous blooming of a dream she thought long dead. Izuku saw it as the first successful infiltration of enemy territory. Walking the hallowed halls of UA High for the first time as a student was a surreal experience. The ceilings were impossibly high, the windows vast panes of glass that flooded the corridors with morning light. Everything was clean, modern, and radiated an aura of institutional power. This was the forge of heroes, the heart of the system Madara so despised. To his classmates, it was a cathedral. To Izuku, it was a fortress he had to understand from the inside out. He found the classroom door, a ridiculously oversized slab of wood and metal labeled 1A in bold red. He paused for a moment, taking a deep, calming breath, centering the quiet pool of chakra in his gut. This was a new kind of battlefield, one of deception and observation. Remember your purpose. Madara's voice echoed in the sanctum of his mind, a constant, chilling companion. You are not here to make friends. You are not here to become one of them. You are here to learn their strengths, identify their weaknesses, and ultimately to surpass them all. You are the ghost in their machine. With a steady hand, he slid the heavy door open. The classroom was already buzzing with a low hum of chatter. A handful of students were scattered around, most of them familiar faces from the entrance exam. His eyes did a quick, analytical sweep. A girl with pink skin and horns was talking animatedly with a boy who had what looked like 6 arms. A bird-headed boy sat stoically by the window. His gaze lingered for a moment on the empty seat in the back row, next to a boy with a striking half-red, half-white hair. He filed that image away. He spotted the boy with glasses from the orientation, the one who had publicly chastised him. He was standing stiffly by the front desk, his movements sharp and precise. As Izuku entered, the boy's head snapped towards him. He marched over, his hand chopping the air with military precision. "Good morning," he announced, his voice booming in the relatively quiet room. "I am Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy, Midoriya Izuku." Izuku replied, his voice even. He gave a slight, polite bow of his head. "Midoriya-kun." Ida continued, his expression severe. "I must admit, I misjudged you at the exam orientation. I failed to see the true depth of your perception." "You realized the true nature of the practical exam, didn't you? While I was focused on the obvious, you understood the hidden metric, the test of character. I, on the other hand, am humbled by my own short-sightedness." Izuku simply stared at him. Ida had constructed an entire narrative in which Izuku was a master strategist who had outthought the exam itself. It was a flawed but convenient interpretation. It was better than the truth. "Something like that," Izuku said, the non-committal answer leaving Ida to his own conclusions. He moved to take a seat near the back, preferring the tactical advantage of having the room in his field of vision. Just as he was about to sit, the door slid open again, and the girl he had rescued from the zero-pointer entered. Her cheeks were flushed, and she seemed to be radiating a nervous but excited energy. It was Uraraka Ochako. She saw him, and her eyes widened in recognition. "Oh! You're here!" she chirped, hurrying over to his desk. "The plain-looking boy who was so intense!" She seemed to realize how that sounded and began waving her hands frantically. "I mean, not plain in a bad way. Just, your face is calming? Anyway, thank you so much for saving me back there. That fireball thing was incredible. And how you threw that chunk of concrete. Are you okay? You seemed really tired after." Her barrage of earnest gratitude was a stark contrast to the cold, analytical environment he was trying to maintain. It was disarming. Naivete. Madara's voice dripped with disdain. "Her power is novel, but her spirit is that of a peasant. She sees a spectacle and is awed by it, with no understanding of the will required to create it. She is a non-threat." "I'm fine," Izuku said, his tone polite but distant. "I'm glad you weren't hurt." He offered nothing more. No friendly chatter, no shared excitement. He was a wall, and her bubbly energy seemed to splash against it and recede, a look of slight confusion on her face. Before she could try again, a loud, grating voice cut through the room. "Get your feet off that desk! Don't you have any respect for the upperclassman and the master craftsman who built it?" It was Ida, now directing his rigid sense of justice towards the classroom's most obvious delinquent, a blond boy with his feet propped up, a feral sneer on his face. It was Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly. Bakugo hadn't seen him yet. The 10 months of separation had done nothing to dull the sharp edges of their history. He was still the same arrogant, aggressive boy he'd always been, all fury, no focus. Madara reiterated his assessment from the exam. "A wild beast that believes its own roar is its greatest weapon. He will need to be tamed. Or put down." The thought sent a cold shiver down Izuku's spine, a feeling that was becoming disturbingly familiar. As Bakugo and Ida verbally sparred, their argument drew the attention of the rest of the class. It was in that moment that Bakugo's crimson eyes swept the room and finally landed on him. The sneer on Bakugo's face vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated disbelief. His eyes widened, then narrowed into slits of incandescent rage. It was as if he'd seen a ghost, a dog he'd kicked into a ditch that had somehow returned as a wolf. "Deku?" he snarled, the name a venomous curse. "What the hell are you doing here?" The entire class fell silent. The tension in the room, already high, snapped taut. Bakugo stood up from his desk, small explosions crackling in his palms. "This isn't a joke. How did a quirkless, worthless wannabe like you get into UA?" Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He simply met Bakugo's fiery gaze with an unnerving calm. He felt the eyes of every other student on him. They had heard the word quirkless. The whispers from the registration line now had a new, more potent context. The boy who had taken down the 0-pointer was quirkless? It was impossible. Before the confrontation could escalate, a new voice, tired and utterly devoid of energy, spoke from the doorway. "If you're here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave." Everyone turned. A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a year was lying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag, looking like a cursed caterpillar. He took a long slurp from a juice pouch before unzipping himself and standing up. He was tall and gaunt, with long black hair and a scarf that seemed to defy gravity. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," the man said, his voice a monotone drone. "That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource." He scanned the room with bloodshot eyes. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa." He pulled a blue gym uniform from his sleeping bag. "Put these on. Meet me on the P grounds." Now, the abruptness of the command left no room for argument. The class shuffled out, a confused and intimidated herd. As Izuku passed, Aizawa's tired eyes locked onto him for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition, but there was a flicker of something else. Scrutiny. The ghost in the machine had been noticed by the watchman. On the sun-drenched P grounds, Aizawa faced his new class, his expression a mask of chronic boredom. "We're having a quirk apprehension test," he announced, the statement dropping like a stone into the nervous silence. "A quirk test?" the class exclaimed in unison. But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation? Uraraka asked, her voice worried. Yui isn't bound by tradition, Aizawa said, his gaze sweeping over them. That's how I get to run my class as I see fit. You've been doing these standardized tests since junior high. 50-meter dash, grip strength, long jump, all without using your quirks. It's irrational. The Ministry of Education is run by fossils. He turned to Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in junior high? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa said, tossing him a softball. Bakugo strode into the throwing circle, a vicious grin spreading across his face. He stretched his arm back, and with a guttural roar of "Dai!" he threw the ball. The pitch was propelled by a massive explosion that sent a shockwave of heat and air across the field. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in murmurs of awe. This looks fun! The pink-skinned girl, Mina Ashido, cheered. Fun? Aizawa's voice turned cold, and a dangerous glint entered his eyes. The air grew heavy. You have 3 years here to become heroes. You think it's all going to be fun and games? Idiots! His lips twisted into a grim smile. Today's test will measure your potential. Whoever comes in last place will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately. Panic ripped through the students. Expulsion? On the first day? This had to be a trick, a scare tactic. But the look in Aizawa's eyes was deadly serious. A logical deception, Madara commented. He intends to push you to your limits by presenting the worst possible outcome. It is a crude but effective method of gauging your resolve. Do not disappoint me. Izuku felt a strange sense of calm. Expulsion held no fear for him. He had faced down the death of his dreams. This was just another test, another obstacle to be dismantled. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was lined up against Ida. As the starting pistol fired, Ida's engines flared to life, and he shot off like a bullet. But Izuku was not far behind. He didn't use a sustained burst of chakra. That would be inefficient and too revealing. Instead, he channeled a single, explosive pulse of chakra to the soles of his feet the moment the gun went off. It was a shinobi technique for explosive movement, a body flicker. To the onlookers, it looked like he had an impossible reaction time. He covered the first 10 meters in a fraction of a second, a green blur. Ida's raw, sustained speed eventually overtook him, but Izuku still clocked in at 4.13 seconds, a time that was superhuman by any normal standard. Ida, though faster, looked at him with a new, profound confusion. That initial burst of speed didn't match his quirk at all. Next was the grip strength test. Izuku took the device. He closed his eyes, focusing his chakra, channeling it into the muscles and tendons of his hand and forearm, reinforcing them. He squeezed. The device's digital display shot up, finally stopping at 120 kilograms. It wasn't the monstrous, device-breaking score of a pure-strength quirk like the six-armed boy, but it was far beyond what his lean frame should have been capable of. The whispers grew louder. He excelled at the side-to-side steps, his shinobi-honed agility, and low center of gravity allowing him to move with a fluid, almost hypnotic speed. In every test he performed in the upper echelons of the class, his results a constant, baffling contradiction to the quirkless rumor that was now spreading like wildfire. Bakugo watched every test, his face a thunderous mask of rage and cognitive dissonance. Every superhuman feat Deku performed was a personal insult, a direct assault on the very foundations of his world. Deku was a pebble. Pebbles did not do these things. It had to be a trick. A lie. He was hiding a quirk, the bastard had been hiding it all these years, laughing at him. The thought made his blood boil. Finally, it was Izuku's turn for the ball throw. He stepped into the circle, the familiar weight of the ball in his hand. He could see the anticipation in the eyes of his classmates. This was the test that had produced the most spectacular results. What would the mystery boy do? He took his stance, and as he began to wind up, he felt a strange, cold sensation wash over him. The faint, humming warmth of the chakra he was gathering in his arm abruptly vanished, as if a switch had been flicked off. His hair, which had been floating slightly with the build-up of energy, dropped flat against his head. He stumbled, his throw ruined. The ball dropped from his hand and rolled a few feet away. "What?" he whispered, looking at his hands. His chakra was gone. Not just suppressed. It was as if his connection to it had been completely severed. "I erased your power." Izuku's head snapped up. Aizawa was standing 20 feet away, his customary slouch gone. He stood tall, his black hair floating around his head as if underwater, his eyes glowing a terrifying, baleful red. The scarf around his neck had unwound, coiling in the air like striking serpents. "That ridiculous entrance exam was completely irrational," Aizawa said, his voice a low growl. "A person with a power like yours, one that seems to produce massive, uncontrolled bursts, is a liability. You'd obliterate your own body and force someone else to save you every time you used it." The class stared, wide-eyed. Aizawa's quirk, erasure. It was famous in the underground hero scene. He could nullify the quirks of anyone he looked at. And he was using it on Midoriya. Izuku's mind raced. He erased my power? But that's impossible. Chakra isn't a quirk. It's not a genetic factor he can switch off. So why can't I feel it? Then he understood. It was a genjutsu. Not from Madara, but from himself. A subconscious suggestion. Aizawa believed he was erasing a quirk, and Izuku's own mind, still new to the sensation of chakra and under the immense pressure of being observed, had momentarily accepted that suggestion as reality, severing its own connection. It was a psychological block, not a physical one. Pathetic. Madara's voice was like ice. Your mind is weak. You allowed another's will to override your own. A true Uchiha would have seen through such a simple trick. Re-establish the connection. Now, whatever you're planning on doing to pass this test, Aizawa continued, his red eyes boring into Izuku. You're going to have to do it without a grand, self-destructive finale. Am I understood? Izuku closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He ignored Aizawa's words. He focused inward, pushing past the mental block, past the ghost of Aizawa's influence. He reached for the warmth in his stomach. It was still there, a distant star. He pulled on it, not with force, but with the quiet, absolute certainty of command he had learned over 10 months of hell. The connection snapped back into place. The low hum of energy returned, a secret fire rekindled. He opened his eyes and looked at Aizawa. Yes, sensei, he said. Aizawa's eyes stopped glowing, and his hair fell back around his shoulders. Good. Now throw. You have one more attempt. Izuku bent down and picked up the ball. Aizawa thought he had neutralized the threat, forced him to rely on his natural, quirkless strength. He expected a pitiful, average throw. He had miscalculated. He had assumed Izuku's only option was a cannon. He had failed to account for a scalpel. Izuku took his stance again. He wasn't going to use a massive, explosive burst of power. That would just confirm Aizawa's suspicion and invite more unwanted scrutiny. He would use Madara's method, precision over power. He began his wind-up, but this time it was different. It was a fluid, perfect sequence of motion. He felt the chakra flow from his core, down his back, across his shoulder, and into his arm. It didn't pull for an explosive release. Instead, it moved like a current, reinforcing every muscle, every tendon, in perfect harmony. It was the technique of a master shinobi, leveraging the body's entire kinetic chain and amplifying it tenfold. He threw the ball. There was no explosion. No shockwave. Just a sharp, piercing whistle as the ball cut through the air, spinning with such violent precision that it seemed to defy gravity. It flew in a perfect, soaring arc, traveling further and further, long past the scorch mark left by Bakugo's throw, before finally returning to Earth with a distant puff of dust. Aizawa's eyes widened, his jaw tightening. The throw was completely different from the exam. It was controlled. It was powerful. And it was done right after he had supposedly erased the boy's quirk. His device beeped. He looked at the screen. 706.3 meters. A collective gasp went through the class. He had beaten Bakugo's score. By a meter. And he had done it with what looked like a simple, elegant throw. Izuku walked out of the circle, his expression placid. He could feel Aizawa's stare on his back, a burning, analytical gaze that was trying to dissect an impossibility. He could also feel Bakugo's, which was pure, murderous hatred. He had passed the test. But he had also painted a massive, glowing target on his back. The rest of the tests passed in a blur of hushed whispers and suspicious glances. When the final scores were projected onto a holographic display, the name Midoriya, Izuku was ranked fourth, just behind a girl named Yaoyorozu who could apparently create objects from her body, the half-boy, Todoroki, and Bakugo. A small boy with purple balls for hair was in last place. And I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. It was a logical deception to make you push your limits. The class erupted in outrage while the girl, Yaoyorozu, calmly explained that, of course, it was a ruse. Izuku remained silent. The deception had been obvious from the start. What was more interesting was the data he had gathered. He had a baseline for the power levels of his entire class. He knew their quirks, their personalities, their limits. All while revealing almost nothing of his own true capabilities. They had seen glimpses of speed, strength, and a powerful throwing arm. They had heard the rumor he was quirkless. They had seen Aizawa's quirk fail to stop him. He was a walking contradiction, an enigma. And in the world of Shinobi, an enigma was a weapon. As the class was dismissed to change back into their uniforms, Izuku found his path blocked. It was Bakugo, his body trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate the air around him. Explain it. No. Bakugo snarled, his voice dangerously low. You've had a quirk this whole time, haven't you? You've been looking down on me, laughing at me behind my back all these years, you worthless piece of trash. I don't have a quirk, Katsuki, Izuku said, his voice flat. It was the first time he had used Bakugo's given name in years, and it was not a sign of affection. It was a dismissal. Don't you lie to me! Bakugo roared, grabbing the front of Izuku's gym uniform. A small explosion popped near Izuku's chest, singeing the fabric. I'm going to beat the truth out of you until you beg me to stop! Izuku looked down at the hand gripping his shirt, then back up at Bakugo's furious face. There was no fear in his eyes. There was nothing. It was like looking into a deep, still well. Let go of me, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. For a moment, Bakugo was so taken aback by the sheer audacity that he almost obeyed. Then his rage surged back, hotter than before. You think you can give me orders, Deku? Before he could do anything else, Izuku's hand shot up and clamped around Bakugo's wrist. His grip was like steel. Bakugo's eyes widened in shock. The strength, it was impossible. He tried to pull his hand away, but it wouldn't budge. You've been asking the wrong question all these years, Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper, but it cut through Bakugo's rage like glass. You always asked what I had. You should have been asking who I am. He leaned in closer, his calm green eyes holding Bakugo's furious red ones. And for the record, we were never friends, Katsuki. He released Bakugo's wrist, shoving it away with a finality that was more devastating than any punch. He turned and walked away, not even looking back, leaving Bakugo standing there, stunned into silence, his hands still tingling from the impossible strength of the boy he had always believed was nothing. Later that day, Shota Aizawa sat in the darkened teacher's lounge, rewatching the footage from the fitness test on a tablet. He played the ball throw over and over again. First, the flare of energy as Midoriya prepared. His hair lifting, a faint aura almost visible around him. Then, the sensation of his quirk activating, the red glow in his eyes. And then, nothing. He had felt nothing give way, no quirk sputter and die. It was like trying to erase the quirk of a rock. Then, the second throw. No aura. No flare of power. Just a perfect, fluid motion and an incredible result. A result that should have been impossible for a boy with no quirk to augment him. A result that shouldn't have been possible after his quirk had supposedly been erased. The boy had claimed to be quirkless. And yet, he produced phenomena that mimicked multiple quirks. He moved with the trained, efficient grace of an underground hero with a decade of experience. And when confronted, he showed no fear, only a deep, unsettling calm. He was a paradox. a ghost in the system. Aizawa took a long sip of his coffee. He had a reputation for expelling students who showed no potential. But this boy had more potential than almost anyone he had ever seen. It was just a dark, strange, and utterly terrifying kind of potential. Midoriya Izuku, Aizawa murmured to himself, his finger tracing the boy's face on the screen. What in the world are you? He knew one thing for sure. He would be watching him. Every class. Every training exercise. He would solve this illogical, fascinating, and deeply worrying puzzle. The ghost in his classroom would not remain a ghost for long.